Welcome back to the Illuminated Path. This is episode 7. What are we talking about today?
Thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about relationships. So, if you are listening to this episode the day that it is being released, happy Friday the 13th, one of my favorite days of the year. We were actually supposed to get married today, and we had to push it a year. So, we are getting married 1 year from today, which is super exciting. And so that's why we wanted to talk all about relationships today.
Yeah, very special day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, why don't you start, sharing more about us and our story?
Yeah, so we've been in each other's lives for 9 years now. It'll be 10 years by the time we get married, which is
Wow.
crazy. We actually separated in 2018 for about 2 years because we were both just really unhappy as individuals. And so that's part of what we want to talk about today is the importance of your own self-care and how that contributes to a better relationship with your partner.
Yeah. We've always, and I think let's preface this discussion with we're not saying this is the only way to do it,
Not at all, no.
but, you and I, it's always really been I can't be great in a relationship with you until I know what I need for myself.
Right.
And I think in seeing what we had, that was, that became a bigger priority for each of us.
Yeah, definitely. And so we have done a ton of work on ourselves as individuals and then us together again. And so that's why we want to share all of this. And again, like you said, this is not the only way to do it. You don't have to separate in order to work on yourself. We're going through a season in our life right now where we've had to really work on ourselves again just because of the past year and things that went on. And, we're together and happy and doing all of that with each other as each other's support system and everything. But
I think that speaks to it too, though. The past year, we haven't really been doing what we were truly passionate about.
yeah,
And as a result, things slipped, our self care slipped.
hmm
And not that our relationship was really in a bad place, but it affected the relationship too.
yeah, just because there was a lot of stress and I think we were both kind of living in survival for a little bit, especially with everything with your health and
Yeah.
having to come back from that. So,
Well, I think that was the big wake up call. You
yeah,
know, I think being in the hospital and, um, you know, not wanting to eat the substitute food that's fake food that, you know, sugar, so much sugar in the hospital food. And you really helped me there. So Kate was bringing me meals, like home cooked meals, vegetables, and surprisingly, there was a weird stigma with some of the people in the hospital about it. Like they didn't love that I was getting my meals elsewhere because they're charging you for a meal,
yeah,
and I was refusing them. But yeah, you were working, doing consulting, handling the house, handling the dogs, visiting me at the hospital, bringing me meals, barely sleeping.
yeah,
And I think we had this massive wake up call of everything right now is contingent upon getting those hours in and getting our work done. And it didn't feel good. It was kind of I think we both felt a little trapped.
yeah.
I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. So let's get into it. So like we mentioned, we really want to talk about your own self-care and how that really needs to be the number one priority because you can't show up for your partner if you're not showing up for yourself first. If you feel defeated, if you feel stressed and overwhelmed, how can you then give more to your partner and for your partner and do just things like the chores that need to be done around the house, but also do nice things and spend quality time without being worried and stressed about everything else that's going on.
Yeah. we've talked a lot about this. It's just like, even in planning this episode, right? So the discussion, right, is the oxygen masks on a plane.
Yeah.
You have to put yours on first.
Right.
And I think there's a large, I guess, culturally, we tend to see codependency as a norm.
Mm.
Like, there's just kind of like my partner's going to make me feel better. And people depend on their partner, which, obviously, of course, there's things you depend on your partner for. But I think it crosses a line a lot of times when you're relying on them for your well-being
Right.
at all times.
Yeah.
So you have to take care of yourself first, and that's really that's been a big theme for you and I is just I I want the ability to prioritize myself. You want the ability to prioritize yourself. And we know that in doing that and taking care of ourselves how we need to be taken care of, we will have a better relationship for it.
Yeah. And then the time that we are together and spending quality time together, it's just we're able to be more present with each other. And
That's a big one.
yeah, because we're not overwhelmed and stressed and, trying to ignore any of the like symptoms and signals that our body's giving us. Like, I need whatever it is. I need quiet time and meditation. I need exercise. I need fresh air, whatever it is. Like, we're making sure those are taken care of so that by the time we're together, that's, not in the way.
Yeah. And again, we're not saying this is the only way to do it. Like if you need fresh air, there's been times where we have gone on a walk and not been overly chatty. We've both just kind of been present in the moment and we have the company. We're there if we want to talk, but we're kind of taking that time for ourselves together.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we go to the gym together a lot, but there was a time even recently where you didn't feel comfortable going. And so I was going on my own. And now we do go together most of the time, but that's like
And now you
our own
walk
time there.
home and I come pick you up in the car.
It's fantastic. Walking outside for like 30 minutes, that's just amazing.
Um, so we shared how we had separated for about 2 years. Why don't we kind of get into like what we were doing during that time?
Yeah, I mean, almost immediately after we separated, I was like, okay, I know I need something. Like, I need to make changes. I knew I wasn't happy with myself, with my day-to-day, with my job, with everything. And so that was the time, and I shared more about this in our first episode, but that was when I signed up for the trial at the yoga studio and ended up meeting my holistic life coach.
Yeah.
And so during that time, I learned everything about living a holistic lifestyle. And that was really the start of just major transformations for me and prioritizing myself and my self care. And I got back into exercising. Like I said, I was having trouble getting to the gym for some reason. That's when I really started to learn about meditation, as well as learning about food and how to better fuel my body and to eat organic foods, whole foods, um,
You
all of
started
that.
sharing a lot of that with me.
Yeah, I mean, we
And
were still supporting each other throughout this time.
yep.
That never changed. Our support and love for each other never changed. But
Right. Cause I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, I need to work on myself, but then they just kind of go fool around.
yeah,
Um, I wanted to mention meditation when you shared that with me, that really kind of started my journey. And I mean, I've kind of shared this, but like I was just a slave to my head.
yeah,
Like I was constantly getting beaten up, brutal to myself. And that started my meditation journey, which started with candle meditation. I did guided meditations. Um, I did like body scan meditations, and that ultimately got me to japa meditation, um, which was really kind of the pivotal moment in my life. Like I really owe that to you. Um, Struggling so much with anxiety and panic disorder and agoraphobia and all that, you really got me to that point of something that was going to change everything.
yeah. And then, I kind of shared what I had learned and was learning. And then you took it even further for yourself and found what you loved. And then you bought me my own mala beads
Yep.
to try japa meditation. I believe it was that Christmas actually,
Yeah.
or that birthday. I don't remember which
It was
one.
around then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for context, japa meditation is you've probably seen like Buddhist monks doing it, where it kind of looks like rosary beads. Should have had some for this episode, but they kind of look like rosary beads, and it's essentially like in when you say the rosary, right? You're saying prayers, and different beads represent different things. In japa meditation, you recite a mantra, and the mantra is generally said in Sanskrit, and the
Mm.
idea is they're kind of the sounds of the universe, right? If you've heard Om, that is the sound of the universe. That there's a lot of science behind the sound frequencies there, but
As well as like you're vibrating
yeah,
your vocal cords, which
your chakra
di-
centers,
directly impacts your vagus nerve and,
yeah,
and brings your nervous system back into a regulated state.
yeah. And so this style of meditation it's just very powerful. You don't typically have like different things for different beads. The idea is you're saying this same mantra. There's 108 beads. You say it 108 times, and the very last bead, the very first and very last bead, is called the guru bead. And the idea is once you make it fully around, you are it represents enlightenment. And so there's tons of different mantras, but it ultimately ended up being a very powerful form of meditation for me.
Yeah, me as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then also during the time that we separated, I knew I wanted to do something else with my job. And so it was in 2019 that we started to really create our first business, which was New Moon Strategy, our marketing business.
Yeah.
So I talked about kind of what I did. What did you do during this time? I know you shared the
Yeah.
meditation piece, but what else can you share?
Um, Meditation was a big one. I also kind of got to the point of understanding like with the things I was going through mentally and the medications I was on and all of that, I took on this new belief that exercising was not going to be optional for someone like me.
Mhm.
Um,
I don't think it should be optional for anyone,
I
honestly,
agree. I agree.
but it's just the way that people do it is different, and that's totally fine.
Yeah. And, we've kind of gotten into that lately with lifting weights. You and I had a powwow where you were kind of like, look, you got to stop going so hard because I was having pain and injuring my lung again. And luckily there was no major issue, but I was getting sore for days at a time. And that caused me to just drop all my weight and really take a step back and look at like the ego lifting and people who are just yanking and dropping weights and um yeah, I mean, and now I'm getting much better workouts, just very slow and controlled movement. And anyways, point being, there's different ways of working out, and there's something for everyone. So I started really kind of getting into my exercise. That was really when I started getting consistent with my MMA journey. um, I started training other arts. I started doing more with kettlebells and having a workout routine. I mean, at that point, though, it just wasn't sustainable. I didn't have a job yet. So I was literally working out, I think like 3, 4 hours a day sometimes. So it got me to where I needed to go. And, we were also building the agency and doing that. Um, During that time, that was really where I was losing a lot of weight. That was when I was getting off prescriptions. I was starting to, you and I were talking. I started paying more attention to organic foods, um, and figuring out my financials. That was a big one. I
Mhm.
went back to school. I went and finished my degree because I had taken a leave of absence, and then I transferred and I finished up online, because I think the whole in person college experience is kind of BS. but to each their own. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where we were at, what we were doing. Um, and like we said, when I was in the hospital, it got really difficult for us to show up for each other.
Yeah. And so knowing what we did in the past when we were by ourselves, we had to kind of go back to doing that again, but while we're together and just being able to know that we're supporting each other through that over this past year as we've done a lot of work on ourselves again.
Yeah, and that's a big discussion too. Is like holistic living isn't. I think people our angle with this is really like being human. Like in
Yeah.
reality, we're not doctors. This is like the average Joe consumer perspective of someone who had to put in the work and learn all this.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I mean, obviously, we've gone a little further, right? You're a holistic life coach, and this stuff really saved my life. But I think what I want to kind of circle that back to is like, I'm sure people have heard this, right? But you can't always have 100% in a relationship. Like, there are times it's tough for both people. And
Yeah.
when I was in the hospital, you know, I've heard that conversation, right? Saying to your partner, I've only got 20% today.
Mm.
And they say, oh, I can give you the other 80. I got you. And that's being in a team. But when I was in the hospital, we were not at 100%.
No.
I had maybe 5% to give and you were giving me 70,
Yeah.
but we couldn't get to 100.
No.
And that's okay. Like, maintain that perspective and that understanding that it's not always going to be perfect.
Mhm.
There's going to be difficulties and there's going to be, tough periods. And I think what's important for people to understand is like not jumping ship when it gets
Mhm.
tough, but also like you're building something. Like that's a memory, that's something you go through together. That's something that you get stronger from when you're on the other side of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that kind of gets us to being in a team, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of perspective in a relationship. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that, a huge part of being a team is having the same goals and values and both consistently working towards them together. I mean, if you're not in alignment with your goals and what's a priority to you, then like there's always going to be some sort of conflict in that area. I mean, it would be really difficult if I was like really specific about the types of food I wanted to eat and making sure I'm exercising every day. And then if you were just like, no, none of that's important to me, you have to like really have those discussions about what your values and priorities are. And
Mm,
I mean, they're not always going to be identical,
right.
but there has to be a level of like support from each side. What are
And
you laughing about?
I'm laughing because you definitely got there much quicker than me, and there's been a lot of times where I was just like, I want junk food. And I mean, I grew up eating processed foods and sodas, and um, it took me a lot longer to get there. But I
Hmm.
was never like not supporting you. I understood like this is where we need to go.
And wanted that ultimately.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's just, and I think that's kind of something to be mindful of is you're kind of only able to go at the pace that your partner is able to go at too. And so we can move together, but there's kind of a level a different component, different variable of patience
Mm.
in any journey that you embark on with your partner.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like this has a lot to do with like your priorities as far as like your health
Yeah.
and everything in that realm. But there's also, different goals that like, we work on our businesses together, but that's not a common thing. So if, your partner has a goal in their career, it's being supportive of that for them. And then if you have a goal that's, a more creative outlet for you and having that support. Um and just making sure that you both know the priorities for your partner and for yourselves and are communicating that and
Yeah.
being able to always work towards that together and on your own.
I think that's a great example is, you and I have kind of lived by this philosophy in entrepreneurship of, if we're going to spend our time doing something of value, make it a business that sustains us. And we have, our holding company, we have several brands. And I think a really great example of that, and something I've talked with you about before, was when I told you I wanted to learn how to make music.
Mhm.
I had absolutely no music experience. I had a guitar that I had, semi taught myself to play. Um, and at the same time, or shortly after, around that time, you were getting your holistic life coach certification. And I just remember thinking, like, I love you so much more for it because your holistic life coach certification was very straightforward. You go to the course, you get the certification, you start practicing those things, you learn, you know your direction. Whereas me having this dream of making music and playing an instrument, recording it, being the sound engineer, producing it, distributing it, and marketing all of it, it's kind of far fetched. Like it's a lot for someone who had no idea about any of it.
Right. You
But
didn't get
you
like the opportunity to go to school for that or anything.
Right. But you supported me in that.
I bought you your first.
You did. You invested in me. You bought me my first DAW, my digital audio workstation.
Mhm.
Yep. And that got me a lot of learning. And yeah, I mean, you've believed in me when I don't think I really totally believed in myself. And I think that's a really it's a powerful dynamic to have in a relationship because a lot of people don't believe in themselves.
That's the struggle. That's
Right.
what we talked about, the imposter syndrome and your identity. It's a lot easier for someone else to push you and to say, "Hey, I believe in you," and then you have to like get there yourself too, I think.
Yeah. And having a partner who does believe in you helps you get there.
Yeah.
And so January of this year, I got across the finish line and I released my debut single.
Check out John Casanova on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music. His song is called Talk.
Yeah, do it. It's a great song.
It is.
It's a little slow, but it's okay. So that kind of, it's about having that dynamic of being a team and your partner supporting you in your endeavors. I think there's a tendency when people want to do something that I guess doesn't like make total sense, right? Like if I for me to want to become a musician and release music, having no experience whatsoever, no knowledge about how any of that world works. I had a teammate that supported me.
Mhm.
Whereas I think a lot of people probably would have gone the other way and said, that's not going to make you money. That's not going to work. You don't know what you're doing. You know, don't get me wrong. It took me years. I mean, that was 4, 5 years shadowing a musician, doing the whole thing, practicing many, many hours in there. But you need someone who is, I, I guess what I'm trying to say is have caution around someone who's quote unquote bringing you back down to earth, right? Like, are they helping you or are they holding you back?
Right.
So have a teammate that supports you and is bringing the team up, not down.
Yeah.
And so that kind of takes us to communication in a relationship, which I don't understand why this is not like one of the primary, I guess, points of attention for anyone in a relationship.
It requires practice.
Yeah.
Like to be a good communicator requires practice and it requires you to even understand how you communicate and how your partner communicates. We have different communication styles um based on again like how we were brought up and what are you laughing
I'm
at?
thinking of us because, like,
You just keep smiling at
I
me as
know
I'm talking.
you have this very, like, soft gentle communication style, which I also think helps you very well in project management
Mhm.
and in our consulting work because you have the ability to patiently reiterate things many times, many different ways until it lands. Whereas I'm generally very direct, even if it's sometimes offensive. And so I think that's been one of our biggest challenges is like learning to communicate with each other when you sometimes say the same thing a lot and I want to just hear the thing
Mm.
and you need me to finesse it a little more and not be so direct.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of like in a relationship, learning how to communicate with your partner. That's the bread and butter of the relationship.
Yeah, and I think that everyone has reactions, things that might trigger them, and not to get into all of that, but it's important to understand what those are for your partner and how you might be able to help them work through those things and recognizing when that's happening.
Yeah, but that's a great point too. Is you're generally not going to have that level of observation and receptiveness to that communication unless you've done that work and know what you need.
Right.
Because so many people are in that relationship, but they don't understand what they need. Never mind, paying attention to what their partner needs or how their partner speaks and what they need.
Right. And so for us, that means setting time aside for those check-ins with your partner, and when you're not, like, having that time to discuss what your needs are and what your partner's needs are when you're not in conflict or when you're not, trying to deal with something difficult. Because when you're in the moment, it's really hard to like be like, okay, well, now this is what I need, because there might be tension and
Well,
emotions running high. Your nervous system has been activated.
you're likely triggered and in fight or flight. And again, that's not really your response to problem solve there.
Right. And then, another part of communicating is understanding like your partner's love languages. I think that we've seen a lot, just on reality TV shows and um, different shows and movies and whatever. Like, people have different love languages, and
Mm.
if you don't know what that is, you might be feeling like you're not receiving love.
Okay, so I want to mention this. You watch Love is Blind, you watch The Ultimatum, Love Island,
Married at first
Married at
sight.
First Sight.
They're so interesting.
And so here's my caution. We have this culture of like just expecting everything to be perfect.
Mm.
And also, there was a specific moment that's really kind of rung in my head from one of those shows because yes, I watch them with you sometimes. Um where this guy said, I want passion. I want to walk in the door and,
Mm.
have her all over me. And the I think she was a social worker, the marriage therapist. She said to him, she said, "That's Hollywood.
Yeah.
Like that's not you." And I'm not saying you can't have that,
Ever,
but
right.
that's not all the time.
Mhm.
And people have this idea of relationships like Hollywood because that's what they've seen.
Right.
And
That's
again,
why I
this
like these shows, because they do show the arguments and, like, the
right.
reality of, like,
Yeah.
getting to know someone and living with someone and committing to them for the rest of your life, and what has to go into that, and how you can show them love and how you can receive love, and you need to tell them what that is. Like, one of the love languages is, gifts,
Yep.
right? That's neither of our top priorities.
I
Sure,
mean, I
it's
love
nice.
gifts.
Yes, but that's not like
But no, it's
that's not your top priority, and so,
right.
yeah, we will get each other little things here and there if we think about it, but more importantly, we would rather have quality time.
Yeah. I'm definitely more words of affirmation.
Yeah.
I think you're definitely more quality time
Mhm.
and words of affirmation.
Yeah.
So I think it's, getting to know your partner, but also understanding like really kind of check yourself. Like the stuff you see in movies and shows is just not real life.
Yeah. And then, your partner, like we said, like your partner can't read your mind. You have to tell them. If
Yeah.
you want something, if you desire them to do something for you, don't just be like, well, they should just know. That's one
Mm.
I hear so often. And it's like, well, they don't know. Like, they can't read your mind.
And to that point, you and I have struggled with that. Personally, that was me. I had expectations of you reading my mind. And we got to that point where you kind of made it known like you need to communicate and speak up
Mhm.
because I tend to just shut down and keep my distance. But also, once you start making that communication, it's needed less and less.
Right.
And I think, we always equate it to well, we'll get into expectations and assumptions, but
Mhm.
if I'm doing chores, I am like frantic. Like I'm jumping from one thing to the next. Kate and I, we have limited time and everything is in our calendar. And like if we're doing chores, it's go, 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 go. And I've had this expectation sometimes if I'm like just dropping something and doing chores, that Kate's gonna also go and do chores and I'll get frustrated if she doesn't. And so we've had that kind of discussion of like, I can't have that expectation, or if there's something I need to communicate it. But now it's kind of understood if we have that block of time to do chores, we're both doing chores. And that's not saying you don't do chores, you do plenty. Um, but I also think we split the house stuff really well. Maybe that's something to talk about.
Yeah.
I think a lot of households have this gender normative, the woman cooks, the woman cleans, the guy mows the lawn. And like,
I love mowing the lawn.
yeah, and you've mowed the lawn more times than me this year.
Yeah.
But like, we actually sat down and had a family meeting and said, okay, how many chores are there? How many hours and whatnot
Right.
does all
Like,
this take?
yeah.
And then we split it and we said, okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take that, which by the way, we need to regroup on that because there's a lot more in the mix now. But we determined, it's 28 hours. And then Kate had like 15 and I had 13. So I took an hour off of Kate.
Yeah.
So over the course of, I think that was monthly planning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we split it and figured out, I think this whole idea of like men can't clean, men can't do the laundry, like you live in the house too, bud. It's just wild.
Yeah.
Anyways, having expectations and assumptions is an important part of communication in a relationship. So,
Well, I want to just say one thing
yeah.
before we jump into that. And this is something that has stuck with me when I heard it a while back. It's you and your partner versus the problem. It's not you versus your partner.
Mm,
You guys are, again, like that goes back to being a team, but like your partner is not the enemy. Whatever the problem in the situation is, like separate that from your relationship and tackle that together.
yeah, and there's a level of like toxicity there too. Is like when something's bad, you try to, go to who's in the immediate vicinity that you can blame.
Right.
And a lot of people don't want to blame themselves or take responsibility. And so you end up having a lot of tension in your relationship. And so, like, how many couples are there that you see that just like cuss at each other? They're, when they drink, they get in arguments, the whole thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's, there's a lot of deep work that has to be done there.
Yeah.
And I think to that point, the last thing I wanted to mention was, being receptive to what your partner needs and knowing what you need. This is from those episodes on the mind. Like you need to cultivate that awareness and bring that into your life personally before you can bring that into your relationship.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we can definitely get into expectations and assumptions because this is a huge one in relationships. Um, so just first to kind of define it, and the two are very similar. But an expectation is a strong belief that something will happen in the future. And then an assumptions, they're closely related, but an assumption is something that you're accepting as true or certain to happen without proof. So again, they are very similar, but and then a third piece of this, and this is what I try to remind myself and remind others, is there's hope. We can always have hope that something is going to happen, that your partner will do something or that something will work out exactly as you want it to, and that it's going to happen this very specific and certain way. But hope also leaves room for acceptance when things don't go perfectly as planned.
So you're saying like have hope instead of an expectation.
Yeah. Like,
Okay.
I hope my partner brings me flowers when he's on his way home from work. You can't expect that unless you specifically like communicated to him,
Right.
on this day, I would like you to bring me home flowers,
Or there's
and receive the communication that he said, yes, I will do that.
right. Or there's, like there's a prior agreement. And again, that's communication. Was that ever discussed or are you expecting your mind to be read?
Yeah. And when you know what they say about people who assume,
Yep.
you make an ass out of you and me.
So when expectations aren't met, what happens?
Arguments.
Yeah.
Most of the time, arguments. And a lot of times it's like, one person in the relationship will have an expectation and then the partner, they'll get mad or upset at their partner and their partner's like, wait, what did I do?
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't even know that that's something that you expected because there was no prior communication and agreement that that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And like and that there can be in so many things, like expectations about general behaviors, expectations about things being done in the house, um, cleaning, cooking, whatever. Like, again, like if you haven't sat down and had that discussion and agreement, you can't just like hold an expectation over someone and then like get mad about it at them when it doesn't happen the way you wanted.
Yeah.
One of my very favorite life coaches, Christine Hassler, she has a podcast. I listen to it all the time, and she has a book, and it's called Expectation Hangover. And this can happen in relationships with anything, really. It's not just relationships, but an expectation hangover is when you, like, just the aftermath of feeling disappointed and upset that something didn't happen the way you wanted it to. And that's something that's going to continue to happen. You're going to have those negative feelings if things don't go the way that you want, if you're holding on to expectations that, you can't necessarily know are going to really happen that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, so much of this is communication and, expectations and assumptions. It kind of goes back to conducting your mind. Like there are things personally that it's a conversation you're having with yourself and expecting or assuming that that thing is going to happen without communicating that to your partner and opening that line of communication.
Yeah. I think in relationships, it's a lot of times where it's like chores or housework, or like I said, like that your partner's gonna think of you and bring you a gift or is gonna plan a special date for you guys. Like, unless you guys have had like a long discussion about that and an agreement, like again, the agreement part is important too because you can communicate it. But if the partner's saying like, well, I can't do that or I don't want to or I'm not going to,
Right. Hey, I
then
don't have that 50% today. I can only give you 30. I don't know if I can do that today?
yeah, or take me out on a big fancy date and it's gonna cost hundreds of dollars and maybe that's not in the budget for the time being.
Right.
But we can do this instead. Like when there are expectations communicated and you can't like come to a specific agreement on that, it's you got to also work on coming up with alternatives that's compromising and working together to set the expectation that you can actually hold.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there are, unspoken expectations that we hope we can hold for our partner, the expectation that they're going to be trustworthy and, be committed to the relationship and
Yeah.
everything like that. But anything past that, and again, even like those expectations might be different from
Yeah, I mean,
relationship to relationship.
even that is kind of like, the groundwork of that discussion that you have as you build the foundation of the relationship, you know? Are you a good person? Are you going to tell the truth?
Yeah.
So, I think expectations and assumptions come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. Um, what would be some more examples, right? So, I think, and you tell me if I'm butchering this or if it makes sense
Mhm.
according to what you're saying. I'm thinking like expectation. We've had discussions, we've had an agreement. There's an expectation now that we're going to the gym.
Yeah.
Assumption would be me doing the chores, thinking you're going to do them too. Even though, well, okay, now we've had that discussion, right? Um, what would be an assumption then? I think, well, you gave the CT FAR example. Could that be considered an assumption? You had the woman whose husband comes home late and doesn't communicate. Is that an expectation or an assumption that he would contact her and tell her?
Well, I think that's why they are so similar and they really go along together because for that, it's like she had the expectation that he was going to call and let her know he was on his way home or whatever, in that example.
Yeah.
But it was an expectation that was, set and like communicated and agreed upon. So that's like the set expectation.
Mm,
And then the assumption is like he's going to do it again, like today,
mm, okay.
because that was priorly communicated. And then when it doesn't happen, then that assumption is broken or whatever. And then it's like, well, now what? And then you kind of have that expectation hangover because you're disappointed and upset that that didn't happen the way you expected or assumed it was going to happen. Again, like the words really are can be used kind of interchangeably, but um I think assumptions have a lot more to do with like your thoughts.
Mm,
That's kind of how I look at it. But again, they're very similar.
yeah. And I think to that point, when expectations are not met or assumptions are made, it leaves a lot of strain in the relationship. Like there's work to be done there then to make up for that or address it as a team. That that's a whole other kind of side of this is like you need to tackle stuff together.
Yeah.
And there's a tendency to just avoid, to just sweep it under the rug, call it a day, and think it'll be different next time without having that
Mm,
communication. We've done that.
yeah.
It took a lot to get to where we're at. And I'm not sitting here on a podcast saying that we have the most perfect relationship in the world, but there's a lot to work at. And I think knowing what you're working at and knowing how to work at it as a couple, as a team, that's what helps you kind of figure out your relationship together and the direction you're heading in.
Yeah. And I think that, like you said, we're not going to sit here and say everything's perfect, but the fact that we've put in the work as individuals and continue to do so and have done a lot of work together to improve our relationship, to improve the way that we run the household. I mean, that's an entire job in itself that we
Yeah.
have to collaborate on. Caring for our dogs. We don't have children. I mean, yet that's,
Yeah. I mean,
I can't speak to that yet, but
it's work to do when we get there.
yeah, I know that some of my, closest friends have children, and that's a whole other level of responsibility that requires so much communication, patience, effort, and understanding like the responsibilities as well as like if someone's unable to give 100%,
Yeah.
being able to step in and come up with a plan if neither of you can make it to the 100%. So what
Yep.
we can say is that no, we're not perfect and we're always going to be working at it, but what we can say is that we're both actively always putting in the work to just continue to improve and grow.
Yeah. I mean, you working to be the best version of yourself is going to also yield the result of having the best version of your relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, I look forward to marrying you 1 year from the day that this episode is dropping.
I look forward to it too. Please remember to like, share, subscribe. If you can, leave us a review. That helps tremendously. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.